him. And his son, one of the most freshly minted colonels in the world, when was it, yesterday? Colonel Select. Not quite there yet, darn close, okay. His son, Jeff Patton, who's at the military college. Jeff, if you'll stand, I'd like to have you have this. Colonel Select, I know it'll be a question before the General Select, so here you get your first star. Don is head of the Harold C. Deutsch World War II History Roundtable in Minnesota. And I know Laura, who's not here yet, but she's been out there once, and I'll be going out again. I'll be going in September. But he's been doing it for how many years, Don?
We just finished 28.
28 years their roundtable has gone, so they got the jump on us, but we hope you enjoy our program. You'll notice that many of the World War II vets have name tags on them. Turn around and they're going to raise their hands. See how many we have here tonight. World War II vets? Awesome. Awesome. Pretty impressive. Well, the usual slurry of announcements. If anybody's not getting an email or a postcard announcing the program, please sign up in the back of the room. We have our sign-up sheets. You've seen that we have book and merchandise sales out back. It's going quite well, and we do accept contributions of your old library, and we make a couple of bucks off it to help defray our costs. Speaking of which, you'll notice that several of us now have very pretty blue shirts. We paid for them ourselves. They do not come out of the proceeds from the helmets. So we just wanted to have our committee be recognized and stand out a little bit. So that's what that's all about. Is Bev here? Bev, Barb? Our dining captain? Well, she will be. And just remember, if you're going to have dinner, please call her by Friday, this time Friday, June 26th, to announce that you're going to be there so that the church can prepare for it. And finally, the most important is at the end of the evening, as you know, dressed in lovely blue shirts with helmets in hand. It's our helmet committee who will accept kindly your donations, your contributions, which again help us keep going. As I usually do, I throw in a few notes about World War II and what happened in June. And as you remember last month, we remembered that on May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally in France at 2:41 a.m. But also in June, on June 5th, the Allies agreed to divide Germany into 4 areas of control: American, British, French, and Soviet. On June 20th, the war in Europe actually ended because the little island, the Dutch island of Schiermonnikoog, was the last part of Europe that was freed by the Allied troops. I guess they hadn't gotten the word yet. So, now, meanwhile, in the Pacific, we've talked an awful lot about the war in Europe over the last several weeks because of the speakers we've had. But there was a bit of a rage going on in the Pacific, as you know. On June 2nd, Air Group 87 aircraft from the USS Ticonderoga struck airfields on Kyushu, Japan, in an attempt to stop special attack aircraft from taking off. They were being quite a problem. On June 5th, the U.S. fleet under Admiral Halsey, suffered huge damages to more than 30 ships from a large Pacific typhoon which struck Okinawa. So here we had people on Okinawa for a month already, and they get hit by a typhoon as if things weren't bad enough. Also on June 5th, this really makes the deal, Brazil, which had long been at war with Germany, declares war on Japan. I have absolutely no idea what the Brazilians did at either front, but it has to happen with us. Bunch of Brazil nuts. And also on June 5th, nearly 500 B-29s dropped 3,000 tons of incendiaries on the Japanese city of Kobe. You know, it's sort of like the Dresden of Japan. On June 12th, with a Marine victory on Okinawa, virtually a certainty, Japanese on Okinawa started committing suicide en masse. This might have been the type of thing they did it with, I don't know. But obviously it weakened their presence there. On the 13th, the 24th Corps attacked Japanese-held caves on Okinawa with flamethrowers. And I've heard this firsthand from my uncle who was there. with dogs, sniffing out the pillboxes. He said it was pretty damn awful. And the U.S. military leadership in the Pacific Theater received orders from the Joint Chiefs to prepare for the invasion and occupation of Japan. And that's a whole separate topic of what would have been the invasion of Japan had we not dropped a couple of bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On the 15th of June, Osaka, Japan is heavily bombed, and the Japanese are in a general state of retreat in China. On the 17th, Japanese Admiral Oda Minoru committed ritual suicide for failing to defend Okinawa. He's taking it seriously. So on the 21st, after 82 days of fighting, the defeat of Japanese on Okinawa is complete. 4 divisions of the United States Army, the U.S. Army, U.S. 10th Army, the 7th, 27th, 77th, and 96th Division, and 2 Marine divisions, the 1st and the 6th, fought on the island, supported by naval, amphibious, and tactical air forces. Tonight's speaker, Matt Gutman, will probably give you an idea of how those guys got there. Won't you, Matt?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you will. The Battle of Okinawa was one of the bloodiest in the Pacific. According to Okinawan government sources, mainland Japan lost 77,166 soldiers in that war, who were either killed or committed suicide. And the Allies suffered just over 14,000 deaths, with an estimated total of more than 65,000 casualties of all kinds. And furthermore, up to 150,000 local civilians were killed or committed suicide, which is a significant portion of the local population. Less than 2 months later, the atomic bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which would end the war. They're a little sidelight, things you never hear about. There was an island called Tarakan, formerly in the Dutch East Indies off the coast of Borneo. On it was an airfield and a refinery that the Japanese had captured in Osaka suffers heavy damages as 400 American B-29 bombers rained terror on the Japanese city. That's a little background on what's going on in the Pacific in June. We have tonight's speaker. Charlie, did you want to show the video first, or did you want to do it? Did you want to do it first? Okay. We have a little video. As you know, Matt was one of those guys that sits up high and drives a little flat-bottom boat full of troops into the shore. And this is a little story about the Higgins boats and the manufacturers that they make the rest of them.
Who knows whose picture that is?
Higgins.
That's right. Matt knows that boat very well, don't you, Matt?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's the first time I ever worked this machine, so give me. He says, hit the ball. You're here. Go ahead.
Turn down some of the lights so we can see the color.
I can't. If I turn the lights on, everything goes out.
You have to turn the sun down.
told in explicit words why their boats were inadequate. And he didn't mind telling the admirals face to face what he thought of it. The Navy disliked this. They saw him as the small, arrogant boat builder from the South. The Marine Corps saw him as a savior.
The Marines, the only service practicing landing operations in the late 1930s, realized that the Higgins boats did what Higgins said they could do. And since the Marines were the ones that were going to be landing in them, they forced the Navy to test them. Sure enough, the boats could ride right up onto the beach without doing any damage. The scab underneath the boat was built out like a housing, protecting the propeller and digging a channel in the sand where the boat ran the beach. This also made retraction easier. Of special interest to the military was a feature adapted from a Japanese landing barge. The drop ramp front.
Good low 36 armed men standing in an upright position, packs on their backs and rifles in their hands. Run that thing up on the beach, drop the ramp, and in a matter of seconds, literally a matter of seconds, they could run off of that landing craft in the upright position and deploy into combat. It was recognized soon thereafter that having that ability was very useful to use in a tactical situation where a landing was being conducted under opposed circumstances. In other words, landing troops under fire.
Higgins designed what became the Navy's LCP, or Landing Craft Personnel, for landing soldiers. LCVP, or Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, for landing soldiers and equipment, such as jeeps and small bulldozers. And LCM, or Landing Craft Mechanized, for unloading armored vehicles. In fact, Higgins designed more than 60 different landing craft. Actually, there's an incredible sealing system on it, winches it tight to the hull, so even the water coming up is stopped from coming in. The Allies got their money's worth from Higgins and his landing craft. His boats proved to be tactically and logistically irreplaceable during one of the most important invasions in human history. From their decks along the Normandy beaches, the Allies were able to launch a drive straight to Berlin and ultimately victory.
Okay, that's a little background on the Higgins boat. Now, they mentioned the steel front ramp, and got a little show and tell here for you, just in case you don't know what all that noise, all that pinging noise was. Model 35 Japanese rifle, fashioned after the Mauser. They probably make a hell of a noise when they hit your boat, didn't they? So, Charlie, would you like to introduce Matt for us? Charlie dug him out of Allentown.
Cliff, there we go. I'm not sure how to turn it off, but I think we have to let it go to the lamp pulls down.
Hit the red button once.
One time?
Yeah.
It'll pull down. We thought I hope everybody heard, but that would be a good introduction for a fellow who spent time on those Higgins boats in the South Pacific. Lady Gulf, Subic Bay, Okinawa. He had 5 of the most fierce landings that we've had. Rather than go into a lot more, I'd like to take this moment to introduce Matt Gutman from Allentown.
Well, good evening, folks. My name is Matt Gutman, better known as Matthias Gutman, retired U.S. Navy. World War II veteran. Small boat coxswain on an LST, made 5 invasions in the Pacific. I'll go along on each one of those battles. But first, let me start out by saying I was a 16-year-old kid when the Second World War broke out. And I was still in high school. The very next month, I turned 17. And when I was 18, you well all know, World War II guys, we had to register for the draft, which I did. 5 months later, I got my classification was 1A, which meant that I'd be probably be drafted very shortly. I didn't want to be drafted in the Army or the Marines. I wanted to be in the Navy. So knowing that, I went down to the post office in Allentown. I seen the chief recruiter, and I told him I wanted to join the Navy, which I did. It was a 6-year enlistment. And of course, I went through the physical, passed that. They sent me up to Sampson, New York, for boot camp training. We trained there for 7 weeks in Company 128 with 100 other six sailors in that company. They trained us well. We had to wear leggings at that time, all through our 7 weeks. Then finally we graduated, and we had a regimental parade. And they sent us home for a week. visit my friends and family. Little did I know at that time that that would be my last trip home until war's end. So I came out of boot camp, I came back, had my leave, I'd report back to Sampson, New York for fleet assignment. That's what they called it. We had no choice as to what ship or where we were going to go. I found and wound up in the amphibious force. Through their liking, they sent me down to Camp Bradford, Virginia, amphibious force training. I was there I'd say about a month and a half. And was I surprised when I got there? Camp Bradford, Virginia. Little did I know that was a camp. I thought I was in the Army when I first got there. They had tents all over the place. I didn't see no barracks. There was 8 of us assigned to a tent. It was a 16 by 16-foot tent with a pot-belly stove in the center. We fueled that with soft coal. So we had 4 bunks, 4 double-bed bunks in there, lower one and upper one, and it was our home while we were there. But to make matters worse, we didn't have no hot water. We had to take a shower, wash our clothes, shave in cold water while we were there. We lived a Spartan life, really. And boy, were we glad when our time was up and we got out of there, believe me. They sent me then to Crane, Indiana. That was a big Navy munitions depot where they stored all kinds of ammunition above ground bunkers. And those bunkers were large. They were like a small warehouse where they stored all different kinds of ammunition to support the fleet. While I was there, our job was, now this was earth bunkers, big. They had us out from morning after breakfast till noon, planting sampling trees to camouflage that area. From morning till noon, and sometimes a little later. I know one time we stayed there longer, and mess cooks and cooks brought us out some lunch. But that's what we did while we were there, because we were waiting then, say mark time, our ship was being built and it wasn't quite ready for us. So we got word, we were there about, I'd say 3 weeks. We finally got word that their ship was ready for us. And we were bused up to Evansville, Indiana, where the ship was being built. We boarded her on April 1944. She was commissioned and was sailed down Ohio and Mississippi River, all the way down to New Orleans. We stayed there for a while. We had liberty. We were able to get to town. And boy, did we whoop it up. Anyway, from there, we went into the Gulf, Mexico, with a shakedown cruise to put her through the paces to see if it could withstand what the builders intended to be. And from there, we went to Panama City, Florida for firefighting school on how to put out fires in the event that happened to our ship. From there, we went back, then to New Orleans, and we took on pilings, big long logs that were creosote in our tank deck. And we had a big load of it. And the creosote smelled all over the ship. And we were wondering, what are these things? We didn't really know. But we found out later that we were transporting this to Pearl Harbor because of the damage the Japanese did to our piers. Now we left the Gulf, we went through the Panama Canal, took us 2 days with 7 other LSTs. We went up the coast to San Diego, California. And we stayed there a few days. We were loading up supplies, more water, more fuel. And off we went, going west. We didn't know where we were going. They never told us while we were on land. Every time they would tell us where we were going, we were out at sea. We couldn't communicate with nobody. And our mail was always sensitive. So off we went. We got to Pearl Harbor. They unloaded those pylons. We stayed there for about 2 weeks. We loaded up our ship again with fuel and water. Water was very critical for us on an LST. We had saltwater evaporators on that ship to make fresh water out of seawater. But it was a slow process. And we were allowed to take showers once every 3rd day, freshwater shower. Saltwater showers you can take any time, but not fresh water. So, salt water, yeah. That was bad. Getting your hair stiff and all. It was terrible. Anyway, we were now in Hawaii. We were set to leave. Now we shove off again. Now we're going southwest. First, I got to take you back to where the ship is built. I forgot this. When we got to that shipyard, we found that the ship was camouflaged with tropical colors. We knew right then and there, we're going to go into the Pacific Theater, not the Atlantic Theater. And that's where we got to. Anyway, we were going southwest. We didn't know where we were going. We were out to sea about 2 or 3 days. And then on the bulletin board, they used to put the plan a day on the ship bulletin board right after usually the evening meal for the next day's activities. So the bulletin board was spotted there that we were going down to Guadalcanal, Russell Islands, New Guinea, Talagi. We hit all these islands. And we finally got back to Guadalcanal, and there we trained with the 1st Marine Divisions. They were the ones that, Guadalcanal was very secure at that time. And these were the Marines that they were training us to load their tanks and what other equipment. And once we got that perfected, we had orders then to go to our first battle, which was Peleliu. We wondered, where the heck is Peleliu? We never studied this in school. Well, our ship was loaded for combat. We had Marines on there, we had the tanks, we had water, we had fuel, and off we sailed to Peleliu. And that's where I experienced, and our crew and our ship experienced our first battle. Now, while we were going and while we were in these different islands, we always encountered Japanese planes, and our planes would intercept and dogfight with these planes. And we finally got to Peleliu early at dawn. fleet that was behind us, the battleships and cruisers and destroyers, were pounding that island with their big guns. You could just see dust bowl that island. Trees were snapping and everything else. And they gave us cover to keep the Japanese in the ground. And then our boats were lowered. The Marines got in the boats. Those boats could carry 36 combat Marines and 3 sailors. I was the pilot of that boat. We had a machinist mate on there and a signalman in case we needed any trouble. And then all the ships, all the boats from different ships circled to get each one in line, and I happened to be in the 3rd wave. And off we went. We're all in line, going in. Now the island's getting pounded left and right. Big shells, you can hear them whistling over your head. We finally beached. We dropped the ramp, and the Marines ran up on the beach. They stormed the beach. And that's where I first experienced death in front of me. These young guys, they weren't any older than I was. I was 19 years old. Some made it, some didn't. Some were severely wounded, others were killed. With mortar fire, machine gun fire, artillery fire coming out. You didn't know where it came from. And off our troops went. I backed off and I had to go back to the ship for more men. And also bring in supplies. And took out seriously wounded Marines to the hospital ships. This was all day long, back and forth. That was my first experience in combat. And I was never wounded. I never got the Purple Heart. God bless anybody, because I didn't want a Purple Heart. And I don't know how many guys on that boat of mine got killed because I was more worried about saving that boat and getting it back from war. So I was constantly busy. And believe me, I was scared. Don't let anybody tell you in combat they're not scared, because they're not telling you the truth. Well, I made it back to the ship, and this was back and forth all during the day. Believe me, I got sunburned very good. My nose was all peeling and everything else from this sun baking down in here on your face. Salt water spray coming at you. It was not a picnic, believe me. When they say war is hell, it is. Little did we know at that time, we were young. We were young and always thought that, oh, it's the next guy that's going to get it, not me. And that's the way I thought too. And like I said, I never got wounded. Well, that was the first battle. It wasn't long after that, we got some more troops. This time it was Army troops. Then we invaded Leyte in the Philippines. That's when the Japanese first started the kamikaze pilots to dive on our ships. It was a one-way trip for those pilots. Their mission was to take one of these ships and dive on that ship. Take them out. while we were there, our ship shot down 3 planes. A lot of near misses. We never got hit by one of the planes, because the ones that got close to them, we shot them down. We had, our armament on that LSD was 340 millimeter guns up in the bow, and 5 20 millimeters on the starboard and port side. And we had a 3-inch 50 on the stern. That was our anti-aircraft support. And naturally, when we beached, there was a lot of LSDs beached right alongside us. Might have been 10, 15, 20 of them. Loading, unloading. And then, as a group, we had a lot of firepower. Because every one of them ships had the same armament we did. And when a plane come close to us, believe me, you could see all that firepower and all that noise. And at that time, if I wasn't on the boat, those on the ship, I was the gunner of 20 millimeter right off the wheelhouse on the port side. I was the gunner. We had a loader, we had a hot show man. He had asbestos gloves where we changed the barrel to get hot. And we had the magazine right next to him where there's a lot of drums of ammunition. The 20 millimeter shells were in a drum that was cranked up as in the spring loaded. And as you fired, that spring would eject the projectiles in the gun. And every 4th or 5th shell was a what do you call it? Tracer, right. Well, that was late take. And believe me, that was a fierce battle also. So, I think. So we survived late take. The next battle was also in the Philippines, Lingayen Gulf. That wasn't so bad. Now, these were Army troops we took in, because actually, you know, General MacArthur was the street man at the time. He liked his Army guys to be back in the Philippines. So, we landed these guys also in Lingayen Gulf. And that same month, we went to Subic Bay in Luzon for another engagement. That wasn't so bad either. Lost troops, though, believe me. And then our final invasion was Okinawa. We invaded Okinawa on Sunday, Easter morning, April 1st. I was in the first wave there with our boat, unloading Marines. We couldn't believe it. When we hit that beach, no firepower came out at all. Nothing. No small arm fire, no mortars, no artillery, no nothing. That Japanese commander on that island left our troops come in. I mean, all day long. But the next day, all hell broke loose. Our Marines pushed they pushed the Japanese south. They went right across that island. Fought bitter battles. And when we were doing this, and fighting, pushing them down south, past Naha, the capital of Okinawa, We found out, not we, but the admiral in charge found out that there was a lot of civilians getting killed from crossfire while they were pushing these Japs south. Our shipment was dispatched because we had already unloaded everything we had, tanks and whatnot, and our tank deck was empty. So he ordered us to go down to the southern end of Okinawa and take on civilians. We beached the ship and we took on, I would say, thousands of Korean civilians, men, women, and children. And we shipped up north, because the northern end of Okinawa was pretty well secured, just to save these civilians. And some of the civilians that were killed, or those that weren't killed, committed suicide. They were told by the higher command that our troops would rape the women and torture them, and these women jumped off the cliffs with their kids, committed suicide. And even some were handed hand grenades from the Japanese to commit suicide. Now, while we were taking these civilians north, we found out that one of the women civilians gave birth to a child on that ship, on our ship. I didn't see it because we were too busy with other stuff. But I wonder if that child ever lived through that war. That was our last battle. We didn't know it at the time. Shortly after that, we left there and went down to Buckner Bay. And the United States dropped its first atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August the 6th. 3 days later, on the 9th, they dropped the second one in Nagasaki. And on the 14th of August, the Japanese surrendered. We were in Buckner Bay at the time, the ship. And did we celebrate? All the guns and all these ships were fired up in the air and celebrating. And of course, we got orders right away to stop it because they were afraid somebody was going to get killed or wounded. And we did. And believe me, that night, all the ship's lights were burned. They were on. I thought I was in another big city. The whole bay was lit up with ships because all during the war we had blackout. We weren't allowed to have no lights shining nowhere out at sea because the submarine could spot that miles away. Now we were able to turn on the lights. And I happened to look up in the sky and I see these stars twinkling up there, you know, I'm thinking, my God, they even know the war's over. That's why I was thinking. And then we all thought about, we're going to go home very shortly. The war's over, it's peace. Nobody's going to get hurt, nobody's going to get killed. And we were all happy about that. Well, we were disappointed because our ship was not going back home. Our ship was selected to disarm the Japanese in these small islands above Okinawa, take all our ammunition, guns, like that. They were piled up this high on the beach that we confiscated. We had a shore party of about 25 men that volunteered to go ashore to disarm the Japanese, and I happened to be one of them. ammunition we confiscated, because those were the terms, the surrender terms. And they had to send somebody up there to do it. And we were selected. There was other ships too, not only us. Like I said, I was one of the volunteers. We went ashore. We gathered all of their guns, explosives, you name it, whatever they had. And we had them load their own boats. And I, as the pilot, and my boat crew took it out to sea, maybe 2-3 miles. And we had the Japanese dump that all over the side into the ocean. And what explosive we had, they exploded them on a beach. That's where I spotted one of the Japanese officers, and they the ones that wear samurai swords, which you see later. I happened to spot him, and he had 4 other Japanese with him, and I went up to him and I said, "Sir, you won't need this anymore." And I unbuckled it from his belt, and I have it right here today. I found out 2 days later that that Japanese officer was educated at one of our colleges in California. Little did I know at that time, he understood when I said, "Sir." And that's how I got it. And I slept with it under my bunk. I cherished that, and I brought it home. And there's an inscription on there, if you can see on the scabbard, right here, very thin. It says there's 4 rather, markings on here. And it means West Mountain Jade Man. West Mountain Jade Man. I want a Japanese interpreter. Tell me what this was. I always wondered what it was. And the meaning was precious man from the West Mountain. Evidently, that officer was somewhere in Japan, West Mountain, where I don't know. Now we thought, now they're going to send us home. Well, they did send quite a few of our ships home because they were drafted and they were entitled to go home. I wasn't. I was a 6-year enlisted man. At that time, I was only had 3.5 years of service in. So I was obligated for another 2.5 years. So most of our crew was sent home. I still stayed on that ship. And I thought, well, I don't know where I'm going to go. They'll probably have me on the base, or maybe they'll send me home. But that wasn't the case. Our ship again was selected. Was selected for guinea pig duty. We took our ship to Sasebo, Japan, and had it fit out for that reason. And what it was, our ship was dispatched to 5 different ports of call in Japan to sweep pressure lines. I don't know if you know what pressure lines are, but pressure lines back then were dropped by our Air Force into their harbors. And they're most effective within 15 fathoms of water, 90 feet or less. And they lay at the bottom. Now, as soon as the ship goes over there, the needle pops and explodes right underneath that ship. Those are pressure mines. Because the water pressure varies as soon as that ship goes over. We had 60 days of that duty, and we never struck one of those mines. And 28 of us volunteered, believe me, the war was over. And we volunteered for that dangerous mission so that our ships can go in there. And you know, we all survived. They padded our wheelhouse with mattresses and everything to protect us in case we got hit. We were so brazen, I say we, a couple of us guys were really brazen. We were playing basketball on the tank deck when we weren't on duty. And yet that's right down near the bottom. I look back now and I was thinking to myself, boy, you were really crazy. You see what young kids do? They don't think, they just act. And we survived. We were all awarded by J.W. Tower the admiral. They all gave us commendation medal from that. We also got a 30 special day leave and that award. Now, I was off the ship, and they had me in Yokosuka, Japan. It's a Navy base. I was a small boat operator there. I ran the captain's gate. And one day, one of my sailor friends came down. He worked in the admin office, and he come down to me. He said, "Matt," he says, "you know what? There's an all-nab letter came down. It's posted on the bulletin board that men that signed up for 6 years can be separated and go home." He told me twice, and I thought that was one of those scuttlebutt things, you know. He was just trying to antagonize me. And he says, "You better go up there and check it out." And I did. And it was true. Believe me, that ship that was out of Caruso was a General Randall, big troop ship, was in the harbor. You never seen a guy sign papers and pack his sea bags in a hurry like I did. And I was on that General Randall to go home. Now, on the way home, we stopped at various islands. We were the first ones on that ship. It took us 45 days to get home from Japan because we stopped on the way to pick up other veterans that were going home. And we only ate 2 meals a day on that ship. And we didn't sit down, we had to stand. There was a regular stand with trays and table overs. And that's where we ate our meals, to make it fast. There must have been about, I'm only guessing, maybe 3,000-4,000 troops on that ship. So they could only serve 2 meals a day. But boy, I'm coming home. When I got to opened to San Francisco, like I said, it took us 45 days. I had separation papers, and lo and behold, 2 of my other shipmates were from Pennsylvania. And one of the sailor's sister was out in California with the family car. And she left us use that to go home. We went home within 3 days and 2 nights, traveling from California to Pennsylvania in that amount of time. We only stopped to get something to eat and fuel or gas, and put gas in the car. And my parents didn't even know I was coming home. I pulled in there around 5 o'clock in the morning, rang the bell. Now, in the meantime, my parents moved while I was I had a hell of a time finding a house. I knew the address, but I wasn't too familiar. So I was off first. The others lived down near Philadelphia. Rang the bell, and my sister came down and greeted me. Then my mother was there. She hugged, kissed me. And they didn't know I was coming. I surprised them. And my dad. Well, they made us a real big, wonderful breakfast. My sister, my mother, and the other two sailors, we all joined in having breakfast together. And off they went. So they thought. Well, when from California we took the southern route home, and this was in December. It was only 3 days before Christmas when I rang my parents home, rang the bell. Now we were having breakfast, the car's out front, in this cold weather, and it wasn't winterized. There you go. It couldn't start, it was frozen. We had to call up a tow truck and take it in their garage until it thawed out, and finally they were on their way. But they were delayed because of that, because we didn't realize. We were so happy to go, and we took the southern route. We didn't need it. And that was my experience in World War II. Now, I was out for 3 years. I got married, had 3 children, and my neighbor was an officer in the reserves. He was lieutenant, and he found out I was a sailor. And he says to me, Matt, he says, why don't you join the reserves? You could probably use the extra money. And I did. I did really need the extra money. So I joined the reserves, active reserves. And I was an instructor there and a recruiter for the next 15 years. And I retired with 22 years of service. That's it.
A couple of quick announcements before we do Q&A. We'll let Matt catch his breath. That was just fabulous. Rick Burton, you had something to say about your, and I passed right over you earlier. I'm sorry about that. But,
well, I'm really thrilled to be here. And when I was out to see my son in February, I met with Kirk and Charlie. I want to emphasize our commitment, and I hope that you will keep this up. In Minnesota, the schools don't teach much about military history. They don't pay great respects to the veterans. So what we are doing in our roundtable, what you're doing in your roundtable, your Vietnam roundtable, is probably filling a need that should be filled with our taxpaying dollars through our educational system, but is not. So thank you for having me out. If you're ever in Minnesota, we do 11 programs a year, September through May. We take the summer off, you martyrs here. But keep up the good work. What we're doing, you're doing, we're doing is important. Thanks.
And finally, before the Q&A, we have to do what we always do. As you know, we're an all-volunteer organization, so we don't pay our speakers. We do pass the hat, but we do give our speakers a mug.
Well, I thank you very much.
And wait, and thank you for your service. You get a star that was part of the United States flag. Is that right? Now you get 5. Cool. Now, question and answer. I have a question for us. Did anybody of the veterans ever have the privilege of riding in a landing craft? Right here.
What's that?
Over here.
What's that?
Actual people who rode in landing craft. I bet you didn't have as good a driver as this guy.
If I may,
Do you folks have any questions or any recollections you'd like to share?
I'd like to ask him,
Ask everybody.
I'd just like to ask him that when you probably took me to Okinawa, when we crawled down the road ladders, my lieutenant just came from West Point, and he was standing by me, Lieutenant Giaconda, and he was a nice guy, and I liked him. So we were standing there, we were going in, and the Zeros and the P-40s were shooting at each other, and bullets were flying all over, and we were getting closer to land. I guess when you were going to let the gate drop down, and I turned around, and Lieutenant wasn't around. Did anybody ever get killed on the boat before he even got landed? And what did you do with them? You don't know.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you quite what you were saying.
Oh.
was anybody killed on your boat as you were coming in?
No.
If so, what did you do with it?
My boat never got hit. It got close, but never got hit. None of those Marines on that boat with me got injured until they landed and stormed the beach.
Well,
Some got it, some didn't. But none of my boat got hit at all. The mortar fire was left, right, back of me, front of me, but not directly hit me. And no shrapnel hit me or anything.
You were on the wrong boat. Any other? Yep.
Matt, how many LCVPs did your LSG carry?
Ours carried two. LCVP, landing craft vehicle personnel. You call them Higgins boats. But you know, in the Navy, we didn't even say Higgins boats. We used to say LCVPs. We didn't know. We know that it was built by Higgins, but we went by the Navy term, LCVP. Now the LCMs, they were a little larger. And that was also made by Higgins.
You didn't tell us what a wonderful ride the LST had.
The LST, the standard speed of an LST was 8 knots. That's about 10, 11 miles an hour. Now, LST stands for landing ship tank. But you know what we call them? Large, slow targets. I have 2 books up here, and it says right at the top, low, slow target. And that's what they were. They're low, slow targets. I have this memorabilia up here, and for you people that want to come up and look at it, I have a model of the LCVP, the Higgins boat here, and my picture when I was in boot camp, and stuff up here that you'd probably like to see if you want to.
Other questions?
Yes, Mr. Gutman. Curious, did you pick up your, or should I say your ship pick up your landing craft in New Orleans, or were they loaded up when you launched?
That was all together right away. Yes. They were all together when we picked it up.
I've read in some military historians since the Second World War said that the Battle of Peleliu was a mistake. It was MacArthur's one of his ideas, and it actually, they said that it was a regretful thing that they even bothered landing there. Have you ever heard that?
Where was the landing? I'm a little hard of hearing.
Oh, that's a lie too.
That's a mistake that they shouldn't have done it from MacArthur's.
No, it wasn't a mistake. What it was, they were being discontinued.
What?
We were on our way up to invade Peleliu when word came that we shouldn't even invade it. We could just isolate that island. But we didn't, because most of the islands we invaded had airstrips on them. And it was to our advantage to supplement our troops, bringing in supplies, carry on. It's like a chain, you know? And that's why we invaded all these small islands in the Pacific, because most of them had airstrips. We wanted to take them away from the Japs, and we took care of it. But they did, you're true. They were going to dismiss the invading Pelican, but they went ahead anyway, because our ships were on their way, and they didn't want to stop it.
If you ever want to read an interesting book about Peleliu, read a book called With the Old Breed. It's about a Marine, written by a Marine enlisted man, and what they went through on Peleliu. It's just a phenomenal book, and I suppose it's required reading in some of the military schools.
After the Battle of the Philippines, what did you do between there and Okinawa?
Well,
Well, the reason I asked that, we invaded Guam, Saipan, Tinian, Rota, GTG, and Iwo Jima.
and Iwo Jima,
That's
that's
between
correct.
the Philippines and
I never got into that. We were too busy with this stuff. You know what I mean? So, you know, back in Okinawa, which was the biggest battle in the Pacific, they had over 800 ships in that battle. Not one day, but throughout the battle, and it lasted for 82 days. That battle in Okinawa. And I tell you what, I'd like to summarize what I have in my notebook, if I can. I don't want to hold you here too long. It says there, USS LST battles in the Pacific. I wrote this down. And here was actually the estimates that were wounded or killed in these battles. If I may, I'd like to read it to you.
You may.
Peleliu lasted from September to October 1944. 2,000 U.S. Marines were killed in Peleliu, and 10,000 Japanese were killed. Leyte in the Philippines, that lasted from October to November 1944. 3,504 U.S. were killed, 70,000 Japanese losses, start of kamikaze strikes. That's where the kamikaze started, in Leyte. And it's all through the Philippines and Okinawa. You know, in Okinawa, kamikaze pilots killed 4,900 some sailors, and 4,800 were wounded, only through kamikaze strikes on their ships. In the Guyan Gulf, 24 ships were sunk, 67 ships were damaged. Subic Bay in the Philippines, that was also in January. 1,400 U.S. were killed, 2,400 Japanese were killed. That was in Subic Bay, up in Luzon. Okinawa, that lasted April, May, and June of 1945. And that was on Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1945. Battle lasted 82 days. 14,009 Allies killed. The Allies were with us on that invasion. 65,000 Allies casualties. 42,000 to 100,000 civilians were killed or committed suicide. 12,500 U.S. killed or missing, and 82,000 casualties. That was in Okinawa. Lieutenant General Simon Butler, Jr., he was the commander of U.S. Land Forces, was killed on 18th of June, 1945. He was the highest ranking officer killed. Ernie Pyle, killed by Japanese sniper on Hiroshima. And that was one of the islands where we to disarm the Japanese. Hiroshima. August 6, 1945, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and on the 9th, it was dropped on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered, like I said, August 14, 1945. On September the 2nd, President Truman declared VJ Day as Japan surrenders aboard the battleship Missouri. On November the 1st, had we not ended the war, we were slated to invade Japan itself. And that was called Operation Olympic. That was planned to invade Japan. And they estimated if we did, over 1 million some people would have got killed. Glad the war was over. And I admire President Truman for dropping that bomb on those. Thank you very much. If you want, why, have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
One more here.
In the movies, we see the troops climbing down these rope nets to get on the boats, landing boats. Is that as dangerous as it looks? I mean, I don't think I'd want to do that.
I'm sorry, I can't actually hear him. My hearing is bad. I have 2 hearing aids, and all I get is a lot of background noise. And I'm sorry, sir.
He asked, in the movies, we see troops coming off the ship onto the Higgins boat, on the back line, on
Never cargo nets.
cargo nets.
Cargo nets,
The
yes.
question was that as dangerous as it looked?
Oh yes, because I'll tell you, in rough water, this boat is bobbing up and down. Okay? Now as they're coming down that rope ladder, they may drop when the boat is down. You know what I mean? So they're really actually dropping down in about maybe 4 or 5 feet. And they're all loaded with all their combat gear. Or when the boat comes up too high and it catches them as they come off the net. Now, on our ship, I never seen one get caught in between their boat and the thing, luckily. But that did happen to our captain. That happened to our captain. Because I took him onto a destroyer one time for a conference, and they were inside having parties or whatever, and I was out there circling my boat for hours. And he finally came home, and he had his light on the destroyer, they were low, and one on the gun of my boat. And I couldn't hold my boat close to the ship, and it started drifting away. Slowly drifting, slipping, his legs were parting and going. He fell right in the middle. And I thought, oh my God, am I going to get court-martialed for that? But you know what? His name is Captain Aljo. He was a Mustang sailor, officer. That meant he came up through the ranks as a seaman, and he was a lieutenant commander. He never said a word. He was probably so embarrassed. And I was sweating it out. But that was it. Nothing was said, nothing was done.
Here's one right here.
Matt, what did that Mustang officer say to you when you put camouflage on your sailor hat?
Oh, yeah. At one time, when I was a seaman, I was in charge of the paint line. That was usually up forward of the ship, where we dispersed the paint, you know, to all the different divisions on our ship. So one day, I had the idea of, you know, we're in tropical waters, down the South Pacific, and white hats would stand out. You know what, my God, you can see that white hat. So I decided to camouflage this. So I painted with greens and dark browns and light browns. I trimmed the whole hat real nice. And I was out one day on the deck cleaning the scuppers. The scuppers were right along the edge. And I was not paying attention. And here somebody was behind me. And it was the skipper. I didn't know it. He grabbed my hat and he sailed right in the damn drink. Right out. He said, "Sailor, we don't allow that here. You wear your white hat." That was the end of that. We also had a dog on our ship that came on in the Philippines called a Margin, a female dog, smaller one. And boy, the captain took to that. He liked that dog. That dog would swipe his slippers and bring them out on deck. And when we were supplied beer every once in a while, and it was 3.2 alcohol content, not much. And we used to pour it down the deck, and the dog used to lap it up. She got herself wobbly, you know. And she pulled off one of our vents, you know, that we had in the ship, the vent, the tank deck, and she slept under there, sleeping out. And another incident we had some fun times. I didn't go through the equator. I could have told you about the whole equator and how we went through that. But I didn't want to take too much time on this. But anyway, one of the sailors on our ship must have snuck up a monkey on our ship. A monkey from the Philippines. And believe me, we tried to catch this monkey, and he was going from one bunk to the next bunk in the crew's quarter, all over the place. And the skipper found out about it. He said, "I want you to get rid of that." And we finally caught it, and he says, "Throw it over the side." That ended the monkeys. That was a monkey business, yeah.
You have attended these meetings before, probably heard much of my same speech, but I did everything that you did. Was there, done that, and so on. But my question was, you were in the Okinawa battle, I guess as support troops or whatever. We were stationed on Ieshima.
Yes.
And when they dropped the atomic bombs, of course, you didn't hear from the Japs at all on the first one. When we dropped the second one, they were on our doorstep in Ieshima the very next morning. And it took them 2 days to get unpacked from their Mitsubishi bombers, which was part of the settlement. They were all painted white with red crosses on. And they transferred, and I have the little box camera pictures of the emissaries no further away from you than I was. And we had, along with that pictures, we got the 16 names of the emissaries that crawled out of their 2 Mitsubishi bombers and into our C-54, which is similar to the similar to the president's plane. Anyway, the large and very luxurious. They crawled out of their Mitsubishi bombers and into our plane at the same time and flew to Manila to board the Missouri. And that took a couple of days till they signed the papers down there with Douglas MacArthur, and then they set sail and took off to Tokyo Bay. But what I wanted to emphasize with you that we had some near escapes anyway. They landed on Tacloban in the Philippines.
Yeah, I was there too.
They landed two C-47 type planes filled with paratroopers, and they killed a number of fellows in the group that was right next to us. We fired one shot from our mud. And we stood on the edge of the cottage, the cots, all night. Our group fired one shot, and we discovered the Japanese, or the natives were there butchering a fresh slaughtered oxen, which they don't kill at all because they're draft animals. But our engineers, and I was in MacArthur's headquarters as a finance man, they took our 7 engineers, D-2, at Subi Aerodrome. That's two days before they disembarked the 1st Cavalry. Of course, they get credit for it.
Have you spoken to this group?
Yes,
Have you?
3 times.
Thank you.
That's all. In case you didn't notice, there's a lot of history in this room right now. Anybody else, or do you want to come up and see the artifacts?
You know, I'd like the gentleman to repeat those casualty figures from opening battle,
Oh, nice.
so fantastic.
Well, I'll read them to you if you want me to, right here. That's what I said. Okinawa was, the battle lasted 82 days, from April the 1st to June 1945. There was 14,009 Allies killed. Allies. 65,000 Allies were casualties. 42,000 to 100,000 civilians were killed or committed suicide. 12,500 U.S. killed or missing, and 82,000 casualties.
Wounded.
Yes. Now, they talk about Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge, but I'll tell you, we can match them in the Pacific.
One last question.
Matt, how many typhoons did you have to ride out?
5 typhoons in the Pacific. Like he said, Okinawa was 110 miles an hour, and we had to ride out that typhoon before we went to disarm the Japanese. And that was something, a lot of ships were sunk, turned over. And we had rain on top of that. And believe me, that rain would hit you. It was like somebody throwing pebbles at your face. You know? That was the worst typhoon I was in, but there's 4 others that weren't that severe. But we had to ride them out. And an LSD, don't forget, don't have a keel, they're flat bottom. And we're actually on top of the water. And every little ripple and wave, we feel that. I thought many times our ship would keel over, but it didn't. Lucky.
Come on up and see his artifacts. And I want to say one thing. I've heard some people comment on these wonderful shirts of ours. We bought them ourselves. They are not the result of the helmet committee, so just so you know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.